Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a story that honestly feels completely made up, but is actually alarmingly real. We're dissecting how a young hustler from Queens managed to scam America out of hundreds of millions of dollars, served a ridiculously tiny prison sentence, and then somehow convinced Hollywood to make him a global hero. We're tearing down the movie magic to look at the actual machinery behind Jordan Belfort's financial empire.
All right, let's dive right in. Now, before we get into the wild parties, the Armani suits, and all that cinematic glamour you probably remember, I want you to look at these two realities side by side. On one hand, a literal slap on the wrist, just 22 months in a minimum security facility where the guy literally played tennis. On the other hand, a staggering $110 million owed to ruined investors. It's crazy, right? This isn't just a story about Wall Street. It's a story about a massive, glaring disconnect between crime and punishment. So how did we get to this wild imbalance? Well, we got to go back to the very beginning.
You know, Jordan Belfort didn't start out in high finance. His ascent was actually super scrappy, and it started early. At just 16, he made 20 grand selling Italian lemon ices on the beach. Then he had a brief stint in dental school, but he walked right out. After that, he launched a door-to-door meat and seafood business. He was hustling, grinding, moving tons of product. But the whole thing went completely bankrupt. Finally, he lands an entry-level job on Wall Street in 1987, right in time for the catastrophic market crash. But here's the thing. Through all those failures, he was quietly forging a very specific set of skills. Actually, let's jump back to that dental school moment for a second, because it is so telling. On his very first day, the dean stood up and delivered a super blunt message. If you're here to get rich, you're in the wrong profession. Belfort just stood up, nodded, and walked out. Right then and there, he realized his ultimate superpower wasn't going to be a tangible product. Not teeth, not steaks, not Italian ice. His superpower was his sheer ability to sell a dream to absolutely anyone. So what happens after he loses that legit Wall Street job in the '87 crash? Well, he discovers the totally unregulated, chaotic world of penny stocks. This was absolute pink sheet garbage that no serious broker would even touch. But here's the catch. These practically worthless stocks offered a massive, unheard of 50% commission on every single sale. 50%! It was the exact same pitch as the big leagues, but with 10 times the reward. Which brings us to part one, the pitch and selling the dream. So let's break down exactly how he pushed these terrible stocks onto totally unsuspecting people. He'd pick up the phone, cold call someone out in the Midwest, and promise them a ground floor opportunity. And if they hesitated, he'd drop lines like, "You don't have to understand the company, sir. You just have to understand the upside." It was just aggressive, relentless confidence. He created this false sense of urgency, making the person feel like they were in on some massive Wall Street secret. And it worked. With that exact pitch, he was closing $4,000 deals on a single cold call. But you can't build an empire alone. So he teams up with a fast-talking hustler named Danny Porish, and they open Stratton Oakmont, a strip mall boiler room with zero regulatory oversight. Here, Belfort weaponized his sales pitch into a system he called Line Persuasion. This was a psychological pressure cooker, specifically designed to drown out doubt and literally bulldoze a prospect's hesitation. He took bartenders, college dropouts, local neighborhood hustlers, and used this method to turn them into an absolute army of high-pressure sales machines. And this relentless sales tactic, it fueled the core mechanic of their whole operation, the classic pump and dump scheme. Here's how it worked. First, they'd buy massive blocks of dirt-cheap shares in companies that barely even existed. Second, they'd unleash that sales floor to hype the stock over the phone, flooding the market with manufactured excitement. So the stock price spikes, right? Then, step 3, they dump all their shares at the very top. The stock crashes and the investors are left holding the bag. It was highly illegal and, unfortunately, devastatingly effective. Now, let's look at part 2, the chaos inside Stratton Oakmont. So what exactly happens when you mix an army of aggressive salesmen, absolutely zero oversight, and millions of dollars in stolen money? Well, by the early 90s, Stratton Oakmont transformed from a strip mall brokerage into a full-blown electric carnival. The office culture wasn't just toxic, it was a literal criminal playground. We're talking screaming phones, air horns going off, daily narcotics and quaaludes right on the sales floor just to keep the energy up. They literally had strippers in the conference room. They'd publicly humiliate underperforming brokers while tossing Rolexes to the top earners. And as the money piled up, things escalated to smuggling physical cash offshore to Switzerland, sometimes literally sewn into envelopes and stuffed inside a housekeeper's bra. I mean, you really can't make this stuff up. But hey, we really need to ground ourselves in the true cost here.
This chaotic, adrenaline-fueled frat party wasn't funded by magic. It was funded by everyday people, working-class retirees, desperate parents, a war veteran who invested his entire life savings. These were the folks Wall Street ignored, who were sold on false certainty. People who lost absolutely everything just to fund Belfort's helicopters, his Lamborghinis, a massive yacht named Naomi, and his $2,000 Armani suits.
That brings us to part 3, the fall and the unraveling of the empire.
Because when you build an empire entirely on smoke, mirrors, and reckless fraud, a catastrophic fall isn't just a possibility, it's a guarantee. By 1996, his personal life was totally mirroring his crumbling business. Against his captain's direct warnings, a heavily intoxicated Belfort insisted they sail his yacht straight into a massive Mediterranean storm. The yacht started taking on water and ultimately sank right into the sea. His family literally had to be rescued by the Italian Navy. The yacht was destroyed, and honestly, it was the perfect metaphor for what was about to happen back home. Back on land, the walls were closing in fast. The SEC had already flagged a growing list of suspicious filings. But the real danger? That came from FBI agent Gregory Coleman, who totally smelled blood in the water. Coleman quietly pieced together the cold call scripts and tracked Belfort's bizarre pattern of withdrawing $50,000 cashier's checks. And the most dangerous part for Belfort? His own terrified brokers started acting out of self-preservation and wearing wires. The whole thing finally exploded in October 1996, when federal agents raided the Stratton Oakmont office, pulling phones from desks and emptying filing cabinets. But Belfort's sheer arrogance just wouldn't let him quit. In early 1997, while he was under intense federal investigation and explicitly forbidden from moving any funds, he went ahead and wired $2 million straight to Switzerland. The transaction was traced, and worse for him, the conversation about it had been recorded. That single $2 million wire transfer was the final thread that unraveled the whole shebang, completely sealing his fate. And now, part 4, the twisted rebirth. Going from fraud to fame. Facing up to 30 years in federal prison for securities fraud and money laundering, you'd think this is where the story ends in ruin, right? Well, what did the ultimate salesman do when he was cornered? He sold information. He flipped on absolutely everybody. He wore a wire and handed over 30 of his own employees, his friends and partners who followed his exact playbook, right over to the FBI. And his grand reward for this betrayal? A shockingly light 22-month sentence. And we aren't talking about a hard labor federal penitentiary. This was a minimum security facility with no fences, where the guards didn't even carry guns, and he spent his afternoons lifting weights and playing tennis. And it was in this literal country club prison that the final act of his bizarre rebirth kicked off. He happened to meet comedian Tommy Chong, who was actually serving time for selling bongs online. Chong would listen to Belfort's insane tales about the yachts, the envelopes of cash, the rampant drug use, and he was just completely amused by it all. In fact, it was Chong who told Belfort he had to write all these crazy stories down. The resulting memoir ended up reading way more like a victory lap than a confession. I mean, it was completely lacking in remorse. And the irony here is just grotesque. While he reaped millions in book deals, movie rights, and skyrocketing pop culture fame after Hollywood turned his life into a blockbuster, the actual fraction of the $110 million paid back in restitution to his victims remains incredibly tiny. So while he became this global icon, the everyday people he ruined were left with nothing but broken promises and legal loopholes. And today, he's doing just fine. He thrives as a motivational speaker, a sales coach, and a podcast host. He books stages all over the world. And incredibly, he literally teaches ethics in sales now. He didn't just escape justice, he fully monetized it. He wears that wolf moniker proudly, treating it like a badge of honor rather than a criminal scar. So as we wrap up this explainer, I think we have to pause and ask a really uncomfortable question about our society's relationship with wealth and greed. Why do we applaud him? When the movie came out, audiences laughed, critics cheered. We literally turned a convicted fraudster who stole life savings from vulnerable people into a pop culture icon. Perhaps, as Belfort himself once noted, he was guilty of being greedy, sure, but so was everybody else. And maybe that's exactly why he got away with it. Deep down, did we actually want him punished? Or did we kind of want to be him? It's a pretty chilling thought to leave you with, and it forces us to reconsider not just how Wall Street operates, but what we actually value as a culture. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this deep dive really helped you see the machinery behind the movie magic. Catch you next time.